Oh my gosh. All right, guys, we're about to start. It's basically starting now. Okay, guys, the heater is turning off. Jake, can you make sure the heater's turning off and punch it down 2 more times just to be safe? I guess I was chilly for a second when I got in. Sorry, guys. We got to erase this awesome Silly Symphony trace.
No.
I thought you were scared of the Silly Symphonies first. All right, guys.
Other people look scared than I can.
Yeah. That makes sense. Let's get started, guys. Maybe I'll stop as we go to hear about y'all's weekend. The weather was nice. My weekend felt way too short, honestly. It's one of those Mondays where it's like, oh, it's already Monday. I would love another Sunday. But it's cool, guys. We got 7 weeks. So that's right around the area where it's like we're about to cross the Rubicon of like now it's going to feel like the end of the year suddenly. We're not quite at that point where it's like everything is just like downhill. But we're really close. We're like on the plateau on top of the mountain. Like if maybe in February or March you finally get to the top of the mountain of the school year, then like around April is when you're going down till the end of April maybe. We're getting there. Next week y'all have testing, which might sound like a bummer, but it's gonna give you a break from your classes for a couple of days, so that's something. At least one day maybe just one. I forget. It's like hyper confusing, but yeah. We will do that. Then we'll have a normal week at the end of April. That I think happens after a 3-day weekend. I think what happens is we have a normal weekend this weekend, come back and do CMAS, and then y'all have a 3-day weekend because we pretty much have a 3-day weekend every month. So that'll be April's, and then we have 1 4-day week, I guess, at the end of the week month, and then we'll start May, and it's like literally 4 weeks at that point. So if we can get through the next 3, including this one, we're in May, and that is officially end game. But this is kind of end game right now. Jake?
I'm sad. My pen with stickers on it. I'll find out somewhere I took my pen with my stickers. I will eat a child in front of me.
Okay, guys, pen with stickers. I don't know if y'all remember, I had a pen last week that had like a ruler on it, and it's gone now, so maybe it was claimed by the person it belonged to. Okay, but anyway, guys, so we are starting chapter 17. This is really exciting for me. I like the first 16 chapters of the textbook. I do, I really do. But something about chapter 17, it starts to become fun for me. In a way that it's like a little different. Not that like the first 16 aren't fun for me, but like the level of grammar that you're dealing with in chapter 17, that's when I start to like become personally invested. Like not even Mr. Catalmello, but like deep down, yeah, my clone's original clone of a clone. That person's source. That guy really enjoys chapter 17. So we're gonna get notes for chapter 17 today. I know sometimes we have mythology on Monday, so I apologize. We're not quite doing that. But we will have mythology this week. We'll be talking about Achilles and Trojan heroes and stuff when we have like extra time. Tomorrow we will finish the Achilles story and move on to a story about the Myrmidons. So it's kind of like a sequel to the Achilles story, since those are Achilles' soldiers. And then Wednesday we'll have Extracitationes from chapter 17. That'll be in your textbook. That's the homework for the week. Jeffrey, on Thursday, you guys know the drill. And we might be able to finish this chapter next week, even despite testing. I'm not totally sure though. Okay, this was the sentence. We overcame the huge dangers in a few hours. Again, there will be more challenges like spot translations on the next few translation quizzes. Does anybody else have allergies right now?
Yes.
No.
Okay, I don't usually get allergies, but yesterday like randomly my eyes were watery. And so I'm like, what else? Like I'm not
worry,
sick.
it's not just you.
Okay, that's good to know.
That's probably the reason that I was out for those 2 days.
Okay.
I don't know.
Because I knew I wasn't sick and I've gotten the vaccine, but it's like I have like a little bit of congestion. It's like, what is that from? And it's like, well, I guess the grass is getting green again. Plants are coming back to life. Not out here. The grass does not look green. But where I golfed this weekend, it was finally green again. Cherokee Ridge. Guys, my tee off is finally. It took a year. I started golfing a year ago. And it was a little depressing, honestly. Like, you hit a 9-hole, and if, like, 5 or 6 of your 9-hole tee-offs are really bad, meaning, like, you can't do the initial tee-off, like, it just isn't great, it's kind of demoralizing. But I'm finally getting that consistency, knock on wood. Golf isn't just for old guys. It's actually fun. Okay, we overcame the huge dangers in a few hours. The translation part should have been really easy. Y'all should have had that locked in. Natalie? Do you want to go get water and then forget that I said there was that sentence? Actually, maybe I'll give you an alternate one. But yeah, could you go get water for and we won't forget to bring you back in after I finish talking about this sentence? If you don't mind. Thank you. I know that's right. You can just kind of hover outside of the door. Yeah. Okay, so guys, one thing that I think is a little weird is that some people they're putting a sentence in the translation spot that has nothing to do with this. Like they're doing, like if this was number, what was it, 3 or 4? Whatever it was, let's say this was number 3. Some people are answering it as though it's 4 or 5. And that, it's not quite cheating, but it kind of feels like cheating because it means that you're not even trying to look at the words in the sentence and like familiarize yourself with the vocab. You're just looking at the translations themselves and trying to remember the whole thing. And so you see this and you like think it's one sentence, but it doesn't make sense because I don't think any of these sentences even shared a single word. And even if they did, you see other words that alert you to the fact that you're thinking that it's a different sentence than it really is. So it feels really lazy or something. It's just like, sometimes I subtract points for it, but this time I probably didn't. But anyway, I don't know. We overcame was first person OST must. And go over verbs real quick after this before I move on to chapter 17 since I like chapter 17 and I want to do one more attempt at teaching fundamentals before we move on. But then this was ablative of time when. It literally means in a few hours. So of course it's time when, right? If your options are ablative of means, manner, and time when, you don't even have to know what those are to kind of associate, well, this means in a few hours, it's probably time when, right? Means is when we don't have cum, which is similar to this, but it's like I do something with something. We're not doing something with a few hours. That's ablative of means. This is, I'm doing something in or at this time or on this day. Those are some of the prepositions we use for the ablative of time when. And manner, it's just like cum plus something else. Anyway, any questions on this sentence? All right. Dugan, would you mind sticking your head out to see if Natalie's still there? That's like all I needed to address there. The vocab was okay. Vocab, in my mind, is always something that like everyone should be getting. There were some people who missed a lot of vocab, and so you're still going to need to know those words. So they don't go away. So yeah, this week we'll culminate with a chapter 17 vocab quiz. Because chapter 17 is kind of like the real deal. We'll have like a big old translation quiz, hopefully at the end of next week if testing hasn't disrupted us too much. But it could honestly be the last week of April. But for this week, we'll just do vocab. Okay, guys, tune in if you have this feeling that you're annoyed at Latin kind of continuously throughout the year, especially given that it's like a month away from the end of the year, and you're still not quite getting some of those fundamentals. If that describes you, which that's unfortunately a big part of my classes, Latin 1.5. I don't know. Remember, this year is weird. COVID's weird. Masks are weird. It's been a kind of like obviously like really weird year. So that could be a factor. But I want to address you guys, and I want to address everyone before we get into chapter 17, which is a little complex in a fun way, honestly, to me. Just one more attempt at teaching this system of verb endings that Latin employs. So we have a sentence like Kaiser, Romam, servat in Latin. In English, that would be Caesar protects Rome. If you show this to any adult who never learned Latin as a kid, they'd probably be able to figure out that Kaiser is Caesar, Romam is Rome, and servat must be the verb protects, right? That is the case when I color code it, which is not our normal color coding. I never make verbs purple, but I'm just making it purple just to show that this is the verb. We see that the only thing that is similar between the English and the Latin version is that they both start with the what, anyone out loud? The subject. So that is something that is sometimes common between English and Latin syntax, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about word order. That is the fancy Greek word for this word order. And one of the first hurdles in Latin is learning that for whatever reason, Latin likes to put its direct object before its verb, which is something we basically never do in English. I never say I, comma, the hamburger, eat. Okay, I say I eat the hamburger. We put the direct object at the end after the verb. So that's just one difference in Latin. But the way that Latin kind of gets away with this is that, well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. If I drop Kaiser, it would still be not Caesar protects, but he, she, or it protects. And the way that Latin accomplishes this is this just like the way the verb ends, it basically expresses or communicates what the subject of the sentence can be. That is not something English does. And this is when we introduce the concept of OST must ascend. So if it's ending in T, that's something called third person. But you don't even have to like get bogged down in the terminology of third person singular. You can just know that when it ends with a T like this, it either will have a nominative singular ending, because y'all know a little bit about cases, or it's going to be he, she, or it, and you can just pick one. And same for first and second person, that if you put an S at the end of servos, the subject is you. If you put an O at the end of it, the subject is I. I talk a lot about like, what's a person, what's a number, what's a person, what's a number, and that's good to know that. But the thing that you're actually trying to get to when you're doing that exercise of looking at a verb ending and thinking of the person or number is what the subject of the sentence actually is going to be based on that. It's something, believe it or not, a lot of people still don't understand. Does anybody want to say that, yeah, you know what, I still don't quite get that? Anyone right now? Anyone? Okay, that's fine. But obviously, this is something we've gone over a lot, and it's something we will continue to need to know. So that is what is happening with your verbs that are usually at the end. You're needing to look at the ending to see the person and the number, okay, to derive this subject. That is the reason you do that. I think sometimes we forget that, and we're just like, you got to find the person and the number because Mr. Cattlemell always asks about it. No, it's so you can find the subject. In this sentence, we don't really need the ending of the verb to help us find the subject. We would probably guess that it's Kaiser, but it is important for us to be like, well, it agrees. Kaiser is a he, the verb is third singular, so there's agreement. That is nice. And then while verbs are doing that, expressing person, number, which give us a subject, and other things like tense, nouns are expressing how they're functioning with their endings as well. So Rome goes from being a direct object when it's Romam to becoming an indirect object when we give it this AE dative ending from the first declension. Now it's Caesar gives a gift to Rome, okay, or gives Rome a gift, however you want to say that, but it's shifted to be that indirect object. And we don't often see indirect objects, but they do show up, and often they take this preposition to. The preposition to is built into the fact that Romai is having this dative ending. This is actually kind of similar to something that we see in English with like I throw John the ball, where everyone knows John is the indirect object there,
Okay,
even
but
though,
the ball?
huh?
John.
Where's the
ball?
ball?
Is you gonna throw to John?
Yeah, I don't know. Where's the ball? We haven't. Yeah, we should maybe use word ball again or do word ball. But anyway, so English in this case can actually drop a preposition just like Latin, but Latin is just like filled with the droppings of prepositions and subjects, and those are the things that often keep people at arm's length from the language. But if you can kind of keep track of some of these fundamentals, hopefully they go from initially being kind of overwhelmingly boring and intimidating and kind of like impenetrable to now you're just like, okay, yeah, there's OST must ascend, and there's also first, second, and third declension, and then there's like 6 tenses. It's a lot, but it's like if you can just kind of keep some of those things in mind, which all of which are basically summed up on our charts. And like I said, I need to add the helping verbs somehow. Like I just need to get like a second piece of chart, like poster board, and tape it to the top of that with the proper helping verbs. Because in English, we can't use verb endings to express tense. We have to use helping verbs like will and was and were and had and stuff like that. So Latin just goes about things in a different way, but I want to communicate that technically, even though this might be probably the most common way to order a sentence like this, you can order it like this, or really any combination. You can scramble up all the words, and it would still mean the same thing, and that is not something English can accomplish. You might think, why is this a feature? Why is this a perk of the language? Why is it good that the word order has flexibility? The thing that really comes to mind for me is poetry. When you guys finally get to the level of reading poetry, which for better or for worse, you will, because you're gonna, if you're at LTA, you're going to take Latin until the 9th grade, and we're going to do our best to make it worthwhile and meaningful for you to take Latin that long. The cynical, practical side of things is that you're going to do better on your SAT, just full stop, period. You will. From taking Latin, you'll do better on your SAT. But the deeper thing is that you want to have this appreciation of beauty that a like deep familiarity with language itself can cultivate. I know that sounds very high-minded, but it's true. And when you read the poetry of these 3 people, especially my favorites, they do all sorts of crazy things with syntax. and they have this flexibility that the language itself allows for that kind of like leads to modes of expression that English doesn't totally have. I've talked about John Milton before, who wrote Paradise Lost, an epic poem that's basically about Satan and Adam and Eve, and it's like a poetic adaptation of Genesis. John Milton pushes English as far as it can go in terms of syntax. He tries to create a level of flexibility that's similar to Latin, since he grew up reading and loving Latin, since every nerdy European person did 500 years ago. But now we've kind of moved away from that high Elizabethan, Shakespearean kind of mode that English was in 500 years ago, and things are a little more straightforward, which is great, but it's cool that we can still kind of like read 2,000-year-old poetry and glean this different method of expression. What?
The only reason I would like Latin because of that is because I could just spew out whatever words I want to, and they didn't have to make it into a sentence.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In our textbook, for instance, it's like adjectives are usually kind of right next to the noun they go with. In poetry, though, it's just sometimes like a noun will show up on one line, and an adjective that's going with it will show up on the next line. So it's another thing that's yet again kind of frustrating for a first year or second year Latin student. But it's something eventually you feel like you're part of this like cool club. You're like, yeah, actually I know that word goes with that word. And Virgil is like purposely basically making like a word picture by arranging his words in a certain way that's kind of like, there's almost a second level to the poetry. It's not just like what's being communicated, but it's like the arrangement itself. And it's not something we think about. It was a big deal back in the day to be able to write verse, even for English-speaking cultures, to write verse and metered verse, you know, where the 10 beats every line. Iambic pentameter, rhymed iambic pentameter was like the way to write an English poem 500 years ago. Nowadays, that like there's still modern poetry, but there's usually not formal rules to it necessarily. It's kind of just like you press the enter key whenever you want and go to the next line, and that's the way you do it. But anyway, it's a part of expressive kind of art that we shouldn't let fade into what's the word? Into obscurity. All right, guys. So hopefully y'all are prepared to move on to Chapter 17. Oh my gosh, we should always talk about the weird forms of sumessa, but let's do that another day and get into Chapter 17, my favorite chapter of the 10s. You will need to take notes for sure. Okay, and start out just writing this chart. You do not need to write this paragraph, but write this chart. Why not? It's in the textbook. I don't have the page number on here, but I'm sure it's the first page of Chapter 17. But write it out anyway, because it can give you that kind of level of familiarity. Or like, you know, it's a good way to introduce it to you, to just like have you writing it out yourself. Jake? There's like extra writing utensils. It might just be colored pencils. Sometimes there's like great options right there, but I'm seeing mostly colored pencils.
I need to use my pen because my entire notebook is in pen now.
Cool. I guess. I don't know.
Are you okay?
I didn't get the sense that you took that many notes. I'm glad you want to take notes, but I didn't know you had a rule about it. I'm actually low on pens too. Sometimes I have like beautiful pens. They end up in my car or in my house. But right now, I'm just, like, I don't think you're supposed to use this. This has like been in the cup, basically just to be a flag. And so it feels kind of sacrilege for me. I graded all y'all's tests with it. I would say you could use this, Jake, but like I said, it feels kind of inappropriate. All right, anyway, guys, this is a new pronoun, but honestly, I don't feel apologetic like, oh, it's a new pronoun. Sorry, guys, because I like this pronoun so much more than the pronouns on this whiteboard, which I know we're still grappling with these. I think we all see third-person personal pronouns, it still makes you really confused, and I don't blame you. Yeah, I know they're hard, but these, for whatever reason, it's some of it is the endings. I think make a lot of sense. And the other part of it is that the way they're used feels so useful. I think once you realize what a relative clause is, you're like, oh, I can't believe we went 17 chapters without having relative clauses. That's such a useful, important part of any language, not just English. But basically what a relative clause is, guys, is in a sentence like, the man who was from Italy was my dad. We have a relative clause, in this case, in the middle of the sentence. It doesn't have to be in the middle of the sentence, but here it is. And so relative clause, that's just the jargony, fancy word for what this is. But basically, it's a sentence inside of a sentence. That might sound over the top, but if you think about it, this little relative clause right here, it has its own subject, in this case, who. it has a verb, in this case was, and then it even has a little prepositional phrase, and sometimes they have direct objects. So they have their own grammar, these relative clauses, but they're connected to something called the main clause by way of the pronoun itself. So who does the who refer back to, anyone? Just to be clear out loud.
The man.
The man. Yeah, thank you. Okay. And so the fancy word for the thing that the pronoun refers to, it'll show up on the next slide, and you don't really need to write it down, but you kind of need to know what it means, is antecedent. Now that's one of those jargony terms that makes kids like they just like shut off their ears and it's like, I'm just gonna start thinking about like video games for an hour or something. But don't freak out, it's fine. The antecedent is usually right next to the relative pronoun. And so sometimes commas help us like know that a relative clause is starting. If you see a comma and then a who or a which, then it's probably the beginning of a relative clause. And to the left of it is very often the antecedent. Okay, because the main clause of this sentence, guys, the main clause of the sentence is just the man was my dad. That's like the essential part of the sentence. But then the relative clause, Carson, expands more on the subject in the antecedent. Basically, it's a long-winded adjective because it's just telling us that he's from Italy. But instead of like saying that with one word, which I guess you could say like the Italian native or the Italian man, and that would suffice. But instead, it's a whole sentence with a verb and some like a subject and other stuff going on. But anyway, that's a relative clause. That's all it is. Any questions about the relative clause? Okay. And so the way we do this in Latin is we use this pronoun that we will refer to as qui, quae, quod. Okay, this is qui, quae, quod right here. Again, I don't think it's as bad as other pronouns in terms of learning it. If we look at the nominatives, qui is the nominative masculine singular or plural. So something about the nominative, they reuse the same form for both the singular and the plural. So it's less for us to remember, which is good. And then quae is the feminine. Long I and AE, that's first and second declension, right? First declension, feminine nouns end in AE in their nominative plural. And then second declension, masculine ones end in long I in their nominative plural. And then for whatever reason, neuter gender seems to like the letter D. Like we have illid for illid. The neuter ends in D there. So that's what's happening here, I guess, with quad. And if you see the nominative form of this relative pronoun, you'll translate it as either who or which. That's it, okay? When would you use who? What, Connor? It's not that kind of which. When would you use which, Connor, instead of who? Like, what if I said the man, which was from Italy, was my dad?
The man who was from Italy.
Yes. We're saying who there because the man that it's referring to is a man. He's a human. But if I said the toy was my dad, what?
I'm sorry.
I don't
what
know.
the
I'm trying to think of an inanimate object. The tree, I don't know. The tree. We probably wouldn't say the tree's who was from Italy. We'd say the tree which was from Italy. You can see that cut off here is that. Like that is a third option technically. But let's not worry about that. Let's let illa be the word that we translate as that. And we'll just say qui, quae, quod is either who or which, okay? When it's genitive, the singular is the same for all three genders, which is nice. And it's cuius. Starts with a C for whatever reason. You might want to put a little star by the genitive and the dative. And it's very important that you get this little column over here. Because otherwise you might not remember that it's like dom, gen, dat, if you forget the order or something. And then quorum and quorum, they got those classic first and second declension genitive plural endings. Okay, so if you see cuius or quorum/quorum, translate it as whose, okay? Because whose is like the possessive version of who. But if it's referring to a thing, we don't want to say the tree whose. I mean, saying a tree as a who, that's like almost okay. But the store whose, that almost works too. But anyway, if it's not a person who's referring to of which, sorry, that's a little cut off and it's in a retina searing neon green, but of which for that. And then the rest of them are just whom. I'm almost positive on the next slide. No, I never had. That's annoying. Okay. So when you're writing whom, also write which still. Whose of which. I don't know what that's about. Yep. So again, if it's a thing, you can use what you can use that. But let's not actually use that. But so which, of which, or which for all of them. But this is when we actually bust out whom. Some people make a big deal about like when to use whom instead of who. This is what it is that like in the sentence, I don't know, we don't think of English as having a dative, accusative, and ablative, but we sort of do. We just lump them all together and call it the objective case. The objective form of who is whom. So if who is the subject of something, it's who. But if it's not, it's either possessive whose or objective whom. No, that actually wouldn't work. Because in this sentence, like I said, like the relative clause is kind of a grammar bubble of its own. Like it has its own grammar going on, Connor. So it's like, who is the subject of that relative clause? We'll see examples in a second where it's not going to be the subject, it will be whom. But there, it's like who verbs from a prepositional phrase. So who is actually the subject? So we would use qui for the Latin version of this sentence. We would say vir for man, vir, qui, who, erat for was, ex Italia from Italy, erat meus pater, was my dad. But anyway, I should have that typed out, honestly. But if everyone got this chart, we can move on and keep talking about these. If it sounds tricky, it's not really, but you do kind of need to understand it conceptually. Okay, don't write any of this, but a relative clause refers to, okay, which comes from this Latin verb you guys will get eventually next year, refers to, and is essentially equivalent to its antecedent. Okay, antecedent even comes from a verb that means to go before. And this is an important thing before I call it Ella, is that the relative clause will agree in number and gender with its antecedent, but not necessarily the case. I'll go back to that, but just to say what I mean, like who here would need to be masculine to match man and singular, but it doesn't have to be nominative like the man is. In this case, they actually both are nominative technically, but they don't have to be. Ella, did you have a question?
No, never mind.
Okay. So here's another example. The woman whom you are praising is wise. Why do we use whom here, guys? This is the relative clause, right? The main clause is the woman is wise. But the relative clause is whom you are praising. Why are we using whom there, anyone? What case would that be in Latin? What's the subject of this relative clause is what I should ask.
What? You know, fun water.
What is it? Don't do that accent, Loki. Sorry, you're not allowed. Do some British ones, do some Scottish or Irish ones. Canadian. Maybe.
I will Indian scam you then.
You can't.
I will Indian scam you.
Is there an Indian person in here? Like, 'cause that's offensive, right? Yeah, you're not allowed to do that, Carson. Nathan. Okay. What is the subject of this relative clause? I'm gonna help you guys be politically correct, huh?
I was using an accent.
Because it's not like your accent. Like Indian comedians do that accent because they're like, hey, my dad actually talks like that. But if you're just a white dude in Colorado, not just, I don't mean to say just though, but like you're not. Anyway, it's like you get to do the accents associated with your culture. So for a person who's Caucasian, that's like Western European accents. You can do Russian. Russian is about as far as we can go. Anyway, ask your mom about it. She'll probably agree with you. Okay. What is the subject of the relative clause, anyone? Whom you are praising? Think about it. The word order is a little weird even for English. Anyone? John?
Would it be you?
Yeah, it's just you. So that's why whom here is whom and not who. Okay, we wouldn't say the woman who you are praising. And it's just because whom is actually the what. It's you are praising whom. So it's actually weirdly, anyone? It's actually a direct object. And so this is the only time in English a direct object happens before subjects. But you don't need to think of it that way. That might confuse you. So anyway, let's keep moving. The fancier word for a relative clause is it's a type of subordinate clause. Don't learn that jargon. You don't need it. And I don't think this note is worth it. Woman is the subject, whereas whom has a double loyalty to the woman it refers to and the clause it is within. Yeah, y'all don't really need to think about that. But let's do some examples. We know how this works. Grammar is always very boring and impenetrable when you're learning it theoretically. But once you start applying it and seeing it work in practice, you're like, oh, okay, this either isn't that bad or it's not as boring as I thought, it's not as hard as I thought. Hopefully one of those things happen. Okay, so our first example, delago. What does delago mean, anyone? It's basically amo, amare. Yeah, to love. It's just synonymous with amo. And who loves here, John, Aiden, or Connor? Delago. Huh? No, look at the end of the verb. Don't look at the next word yet. Look at the end of the verb.
Italian.
Do I love, you love, it loves, or we love? Or y'all
They
love?
love.
I don't see an NT at the end of that.
I-
Carson, I'm not asking you yet. No. Jake or Maddie Dugan. If we look at Delago and see that it is ending in an O, who is loving something here? What? I. So Dugan understands something that maybe John or Aiden don't always understand necessarily. I think y'all do sometimes get this, but I think we just we always want to move too fast to where we don't stop and just kind of chill for a second with that last part of the verb. Yeah, Delago, it's going to be I love, guys, because if a verb ends in O, it is first person singular, subject is I. So anyway, I love the girl. Okay, it's not the girl loving something. That would be like Delegate Puella. Anyway, I love the girl, and then Quae ex Italia Wanet. Does anybody want to take a crack at that? Quae ex Italia Wanet. Is Quae going to be who or which? I love the girl who or which? Who, yeah, because its antecedent is probably what, Aiden?
Who is from Italy?
Its antecedent, meaning the thing it's referring to, is probably what? So, guys, I'm going to give it away that this is the relative clause here. It's not always this easy where one half of the sentence is the main clause, and then after a comma, and then you see a qui qua quad, it's a relative clause. But it often is, actually. So as soon as you see a qui qua quad, because the editors won't always give us the verb, okay, because the verb does actually help, but as soon as you see the qui qua quad, start drawing a line to underline said relative clause, which I should be writing out these relative clauses as I go. Take notes, guys. You are old enough to do that. And then draw the line until you hit a verb, okay? Because the relative clause will end with a verb 99% of the time, 100% of the time. And so I hit that verb, I'm like, okay, I got it. The main clause is just I love the girl. The relative clause, it's going to be who, because, guys, the relative pronoun here, quae, its antecedent is what? Meaning, what is it going to refer to? Our only options are basically I and the girl. What do y'all think?
I, the girl.
It's going to be the girl. I love the girl who. Okay, what else would it be referring to? Why the heck would we say who after saying the girl unless we're starting this relative clause where we're going to talk more about this girl? Does that make sense? I love the girl who, and then we translate the rest of the sentence. Who what? Quae is just nominative. So whereas the girl is the direct object in the main clause, the relative clause that's referring to her in the relative clause is actually the subject of said relative clause. Who wane it to anyone? Veni vidi vici, I
Came
So who came ex Italia?
from Italy.
From Italy. Who came from Italy? What, Jake?
Can I have one?
Yes. And then try engaging in the class. Try to actually come back and really just pay attention. Prove to yourself that you get or don't get this.
The wrong tense.
Okay, so I love the woman who comes from Italy. Yeah, technically the macro over this makes it perfect tense came, but whatever, that's not really what we're learning here. So I love the woman who comes from Italy. Who is our relative pronoun? Its antecedent is woman, okay? And it will not always be separated by a comma, okay? So that's an example of one where we use quae for qui qua quad, which is just the nominative of the verb, of the pronoun. And so it's just who, it's not whom. And we wouldn't use which because the girl is not just a thing, she's a person. So who. All right, the man, and then de quo de boss. Once again, our commas are going to give it away here, but it won't always be this easy. Now, I just said that usually our relative clauses will start with the qui qua quad itself, and you'll go until you hit a verb. The exception is if it's an ablative or accusative version of qui qua quad, and it's the object of a preposition. In those cases, it might start with said preposition. Okay? DK boss, Alora or Antonio, who is saying, because dico dicro means to say or speak. Who is saying something here if it's ending in an S? I, you, it, we, y'all, or they? Aiden? You, because Aiden sees that it's ending in an S, and so it's second person, right? Huh? I guess so. It's second person singular, okay? You can't always just step out and go to the bathroom when teachers ask you questions that you're unable to answer because you refuse to engage with the class. The man, about or from whom? Because if this is quo, and I'm guessing its antecedent is the man, it's going to be referring back to the man. We're probably going to use whom, and I'm just kind of guessing that. But should we say the man from whom or about whom? What do y'all think? About whom? The man about whom. And then who was speaking? Because this is also imperfect, Aiden. Yeah, very good. The man about whom you were speaking. So this is an example of one where the relative clause is in the middle, which does make it harder. Okay, a picture if the commas weren't there, especially, it'd be really nasty. You'd be like, why? Like the first verb is in the middle and it's coming after a relative clause, and I don't know like what's going on. But it's actually not that difficult. It turns out the main clause is just the man is a dear friend. That's the main clause. But there's this little 3-word relative clause in the middle. The man about whom you were speaking is a dear friend. So again, this time I'll underline the main clause. It's just the man is a dear friend. It's called like a predicate nominative. It's not even a direct object. But in the middle, we have this weird relative clause, and the quo antecedent is the man. Okay? Quo is just there to be like, hey, I'm actually part of the relative clause. We're going to expand on one of the words in the main clause. In this case, the man. Okay? It's just a long-winded adjective, basically. We don't have a single word for like a person who you were speaking about. So you can't just use one adjective. You use an entire clause to kind of communicate that information. All right, so that's an example where we're using the ablative of qui, qui, quad. Of course, that's the ablative. It has a long O. Before I proceed on, let's go back real quick. I think I got sidetracked when I was talking about this. So, okay, we saw the genitives cuius and quorum, quorum. It's going to be whose or of which. Cui is the other one that starts with a C. For some reason, the genitive and the dative start with a C. I'm not sure what that's about, but pronouns generally have kind of slightly weird datives. We actually have the same IUS we see at the end of cuius showing up in cuius, in ilius, and in eius, which are genitives of these pronouns. And then also, pronouns over on this whiteboard, a lot of the dative ones end in long I. So for some reason, pronouns like to end in I or have an I in them when they're in the dative case. And then our accusatives sure look accusative to me. Okay, I think quim, the masculine accusative, went with em instead of um, because that would be quum, which would be like kind of crazy. So quim, quam, and quad. So quad is just the same as denominator. And then look at the ablatives. They sure look ablative-y, right? Ending in that single long vowel. And then quibus can be ablative or dative plural. And so it won't necessarily be this. I need to tweak these a little bit. But if y'all have made this chart, then you can add something really quick. So if it's dative, if you're seeing cui or quibus and you know it's dative, it's not just going to be whom. It's probably going to be what preposition whom. Anyone? What do we usually use with a dative? Yeah, to. Very good, Ava. To whom. Accusative will just be like something verbing whom, like we just saw whom you were praising, whom the subject was verbing. And then ablative, it's going to be like whatever it's next. We just saw one with day, so it was like by, about whom. But it could be like whatever the preposition is. So you might want to add that to your chart. And now let's get back to our translations. I've had this chart for so long, but I still need to tweak it in certain ways. All right, number 3. Who wants to read number 3? I can tell you guys are like, why is he talking so much? He's not calling on us enough. Thank you. Aiden. Yeah, the cui. Very good. So the girl, and then it's already underlined. Did I mean to do that? Yeah, it's already underlined. That's a relative clause. But that's what you should think, even if there weren't commas or the underline here, because cui is like from qui qua quad. And so from cui, you start your relative clause underline. And then we hit dot from dodare to give. And that's our clause. So the main clause is just the girl as fortunata. Anyone? The girl is fortunate. But what is this relative clause telling us? The girl cui, so how should we take cui? To whom? Who said that? Yeah, good, Aiden. The girl to whom, because this is the dative of qui, qui, quad. Every once in a while, dative takes a 4, but here to sounds like it's going to work because our verb is to give. So we're probably giving something to the girl. The girl to whom, and then this is weird, guys. Something about a book, but like, so somebody's like giving a book to the girl, but it's a drop subject inside of the relative clause, which is kind of nasty. But it's dot third person, so Kylie or Jake, who is giving, we should say the girl to whom so-and-so gives a book. What can we use for a third person singular verb that has a drop subject? You have 3 options. They're huge hints. Aiden. It. Okay, the girl to whom it gives the book. So if say there was just one other word in here, like Kikero or Nauta, Cicero gives the book, or the sailor gives the book, we would use that instead of he, she, or it. But we have to use he or she or it because it's a drop subject. So, and that is weird. I don't think that'll happen too much in relative clause. The girl to whom he or she gives the direct object book is fortunate. All right, that's the sentence. So its antecedent is the girl, who is the subject of the main clause, but within the relative clause, the relative pronoun that's referring to her is actually the indirect object here. Librum is a do, das is a verb with a drop subject. All right, 3 more, and then we're done for the day. I can tell you guys are going full zombie mode. You just want to be right back in that weekend mode.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Well, hey, I had most of my weekend nothing free.
My heart goes out to Narnia people, especially. We spent 4 hours Saturday morning having a little less than full freedom. But it's just a month of that, right? We have a month of Saturday mornings that are devoted to play, and then we'll just put on the play, and then we'll get on with our lives. But anyway, the boy, Cuius. What case is Cuius, anyone? You want to look down at your chart that you wrote out and tell me?
It would be whom to whom it is.
Did I say of whom on my chart? So, but what case is it? Genitive. And guys, when the genitive ones, like Cuius or quorum, is referring to a person, you could say of whom, but let's just say whose. So the boy whose patron? No. Shorten that. Not fatherland. Father. The boy whose father, and this is a horrible verb it means to help, but who was helping, it's imperfect. Dugan with the NUS ending, who's helping here? I, you, it, we, are, they. Yeah, okay, Dugan knows her person. Who have we confirmed today doesn't know person number? Yeah, so it ends in NUS, so the subject is we. So the boy whose dad we were imperfect helping is fortis. Anyone?
Strong.
Is strong, is brave. And so the relative pronouns antecedent was puer, the subject of the main clause. The main clause is just the boy is strong, but the relative clause was whose dad was we were helping. And so the subject is dropped, it's inside of the verb. The direct object is the dad, and Cuius is actually genitive, possessive of patra. So when you see Cuius, guys, just translate it as whose. And I need to tidy up that first slide before second period, because I feel like I can make it a little more direct. Number 3 is vitam meam, anyone? Actually, what is vitam meam committam?
My life is committed to me.
Look at the end of your verb, person.
My life will be committed to you.
Ooh, I like that you use will, but committam from commit to commitra, it literally means commit. But who's committing here, guys? This is one of the nasty verb endings that you are allowed to get confused about.
Oh, wait.
You're not allowed to be like Delago. I don't know. Is that I love or you love? No, it's I love.
I'm
This,
committing my life.
not I am, but I
Was. Will.
will. This is that nasty third/fourth conjugation future tense, first person singular ending. So I will commit or entrust my life at East Viris. You
To
commit,
the man.
yeah,
The
to
man himself.
no, like these men, maybe. These are those men whose, this is where the relative clause starts. Even without the comma, you should know that, and the rest of it's a clause. Whose virtues laudabas? John, Kylie, Antonio, and Fisher. Who's praising here? Laudabas. I, you, it, we, all, are they. Yeah, because the S tells a second person.
Yeah.
So it's whose virtues you. The BA makes it perfect. Were past tense praising. Whose virtues you were praising. Last one. I fear or am afraid of idem periculum. Remember, idem is that horrible adjective that just means not different, but the same. So I fear the blank periculum. I fear the same danger quad tomatus. So which or who? Who is danger of who? I bet we're talking about danger. If it's not a person, we would use not who or whom, but which. I fear the same danger which tomatus. Who fears?
Time.
Who fears?
Who fears you?
So here at first person, here Trematus, it switches over from first to
Second.
yeah. So I fear the same danger which
You all.
you fear. Okay, so that is a little tiny baby relative clause where it's just the relative pronoun itself and then a verb. So that is the smallest a relative clause will get, where it's just a pronoun and a verb and that's it. In this case, quad, I guess it's a direct object. And preculin's neuter, so that's why it's quad and not qui. Huh? It is technically you all. Good catch, Connor. Yeah. Sometimes I just like think of you all as being the same as you. This is the vocab for this chapter. We get libellus, which is just liber with a what's called a diminutive at the ending. So instead of just a book, it's a little book. It's literally the same diminutive at the end of my last name. We have the actual pronoun qui, quad. We have caecus, which means blind. Caecus will show up like all of 2 times, and you'll never see it again. Levis is light. We get levity from it. Out. We finally have a word for or. Isn't that crazy? It took that long to get the word for or. Hito is an adverb meaning quickly. Koque means also or to. And then we have a bunch of verbs. Admito, to admit or to receive. Koipi is a broken, defective verb that's stuck in the perfect tense, so it means began. Kupio is to desire. It will take infinitive. Deleo, delayri, it means to destroy, and we get the word delete from it. And desidero means to desire, and Kipio is to begin. So Incipio is the unbroken version of Koipi. Okay, that is the vocabulary for the chapter. All right. We already did the Achilles story, but did we actually finish it? Think so? Well, in that case, I guess I was like, oh, we'll be doing, okay. So for these last 5 minutes, we can switch over to talking about mythology. All right, guys, what's up, guys? So, around the same time as Homer, we have this guy named Hesiod writing something called the Theogony, which is not like brilliantly, beautifully written in the same way that Homer is written, but it's still pretty good. And someone either stole it from me, or it's somewhere weird on my desk. But Hesiod in Theogony, Connor, talks about the different mythological ages of man. These are not real historical distinctions, these ages, but they are terms that you find in different cultures. Like, you know, all over the world, people have these ideas of this like earlier Eden-esque time. So just like the Old Testament Hebrew tradition has the Garden of Eden, Hesiod insists on a Greek tradition that includes a quote-unquote golden age. Now, a lot must happen before this golden age even starts. There must be this weird, dark, chaotic, primordial pre-age wherein Uranus and Gaia, Mother Earth and the sky, or Uranus, like kind of come into being, and a lot of the primordial gods kind of just blip into being. But then they give birth to the Titans, and so the golden age is ruled by the first Titans, Cronus / Saturn and his wife Rhea. Okay, Cronus will eventually kind of overcome his father, Uranus, just like his son will do to him eventually. But under the Golden Age, humans lived freely, so it was an Eden kind of situation. Who is this down here? Anyone with a box that's supposed to be a jar? Yeah, that's Pandora. So there's this confusing thing where it's like if she's the first woman who doesn't come about till the Silver Age, I guess that means it's just boys' night for a millennia during the Golden Age and there's no women. But it's kind of unclear. It's a little vague. It's like maybe that's not the case because that sounds so weird. Anyway, humans lived a really long time, and when they died, they would kind of become guardian spirits or daimons, which doesn't mean demon. It just kind of means like a spirit. And everything was hunky-dory. No one had to farm. The earth just yielded fruit and vegetation freely without anyone having to like plow a field. It was great. Everything was awesome. In the Silver Age, though, the Olympian gods overthrow the Titans, and this involves them not just taking on the Titans, but fighting a lot of the freakish monsters and giants that the Titans created and gave birth to. And so we arrive at the third generation of gods under Zeus and his siblings, right? We know the story of how he has to free his siblings from his father's stomach, and that's what happens. Cronus / Saturn gets banished, and then the Silver Age begins. The Olympians become the new top dogs, and men lived as children for 100 years and then they would age really rapidly and die after that. But it's like you get to just be a kid for a century, which I guess is cool. And this is around the time that Prometheus, a Titan, actually brings fire to man, and Pandora is the first woman, and she opens up a box that unleashes the evils of all of reality onto the world of men. And so things start to get a little less good. Zeus actually kills every single person on the planet towards the end of the Silver Age because they're not worshiping him properly. And this is not the last time that he'll do something like that. The Bronze Age, things are a little less good. Men of this age are created from ash trees. That doesn't sound great to me. People become more warlike, so we're heading towards what actually is happening in the Bronze Age. Because the Bronze Age, that actually is an actual historical or prehistorical period that we use to describe a time when people were literally using bronze to make tools. So he was just making these kind of up a little bit, but they weirdly sort of map onto actual ages that historians talk about. Anyway, this one ends in the Great Flood. So the same Great Flood that happens in the Old Testament in the Hebrew tradition that Noah has to save the world from. A Great Flood happens in Greece too. Now some of this is that the Hebrew tradition being developed in part of the world that's very close to the Greek tradition. So they're probably just like their stories are kind of getting exchanged. We don't actually have any reason to think that there was a big flood. I mean, there were several floods that happened at the end of like various ice ages and stuff. Anyway, guys, hang in there. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. And let's do this Monday as coolly as possible. Look, but then Monday's over and you can just move on with your life. It's great.